Cyber attacks are a real threat to the maritime industry. More and more security breaches are being reported. The safety of vessel operations is constantly at risk. Companies are losing millions of dollars. Crews, passengers, and the environment are being put in danger. Building cybersecurity resilience is no rocket science. It's all about people, technology, and effective processes. To identify the security controls with the biggest impact, we recommend you to start with a risk assessment of the vessel and the shore organization. Cybersecurity awareness and crew training are probably the best defense against any cyber threat. The focus on the human aspects should come first, before expensive hardware upgrades. However, some items may require altering a system's configuration, necessitate software upgrades, or hardware replacements. Employing a combination of revised or new procedures and staff or crew training, along with possible technical mitigations, offers a practical and cost-effective solution. The DNV Cyber Secure class notation can be used to support IMO compliance. It can also increase the overall cybersecurity of your vessels, whether complex ships with high requirements or more simple merchant ships. DNV is there to support you, ensuring safe ships and operations in times of digital transformation.
Before we get started, let's take a final look at today's agenda. We'll be looking at the DNV's Maritime Cyber Priority Report. We'll go through the DNV Cyber Secure rules and the IACS Unified Requirements. We'll be having a look at recommendations to cyber suppliers, yards, and owners, and then we'll have our Q&A session. But first, we'll be kicking off with cybersecurity trends in maritime, and I hand that over to you, Svante.
Thank you so much, Simon, and it's really a pleasure to be here to speak to you today. I will start by showing you a little bit of the trends and what we have seen developing in the maritime cybersecurity environment. We did a start of this year, and especially in April and May, we did a survey where we got now 800 people from the maritime industry to respond to, everything from cybersecurity specialists to system owners, superintendents, to HSQE managers, to top management of different organizations, actually covering all the different types of stakeholders we have in the maritime industry. And we interviewed also a couple of other companies in order to pull out a lot of insights that we can share with you today in this report. Some priorities, opportunities, and challenges, as well as recommendations on what is the status on maritime cybersecurity. So we launched it in June at North Shipping, and it is freely downloadable on our website. So you will get the link later on in this presentation. I won't have time to talk to you about everything in this presentation today, but I hope to highlight some of the key aspects. Let us start with what is the consequence. And as you can see here in this chart, there's a lot of numbers, but we're focusing on what is the likely outcome of a cyber incident in the coming years. And the participants in the study have shown that more or less 9 out of 10 are seeing a likely outcome is actually that we have a loss of operation or delays in operation of our assets and vessels. Also similar, you can see that the highest charts here is about cargo, theft of cargo, or damage to cargo handling systems or infrastructure. It can be a major shutdown of a critical waterway or critical infrastructure. So 3/4 of the participants actually thinks that this is a likely scenario. But we also have more than half of the participants even thought that it could harm their environment and even cause injury or loss of life in terms of maybe even a ship collision or a grounding of a vessel. So these are likely things to happen according to the participants of the study in the coming years. But let's also look a bit about what has happened in the past. I'm not going to go into all the details. There are many incidents that have been recorded in the past, but I will focus a bit of our attention towards control systems on board today, especially also what's called operational technology or OT systems. And on the top left-hand side, at least when I'm looking at it, you can see a short description of a cruise vessel, that a mega one, a very big one that sailed off a port, but had a ransomware attack that spread into multiple OT systems on board and actually caused the vessel to be calling in tugs in order to safely get back to port in a safe manner. And this, on top of the uncomfortable situation and the stress and so on, we had a cost of over $200 million for this particular incident. The grounding of a vessel just outside Sweden's coast, my home country, just in the recent days, actually has polluted a very sensitive part of the Swedish archipelago. And the initial reports states that it has been due to recklessness of the crew in combination with relying solely on a faulty GPS system. In some reports, it's also talked about navigational systems, IACS and so on. But and it's not completely possible at the moment on the information that is public to make sense if this was a malicious attack or if it was actually an unintentional fault of the systems themselves. But these are things that we need to further investigate and look upon. So we're interested when we're talking about cybersecurity, both in malicious, intentional threats as well as unintentional ones. The next topic that we have seen is the IACS being updated by a service engineer on board a vessel here in Hamburg, where I'm sitting at the moment. And there was malicious code in this software update that then spread also through the navigational systems down to the fuel control and ballast water valves, and had to be reinstalled everything before the vessel could start sailing again. We had another incident with a service engineer. This time it was a remote connection to the wrong rig. He wanted to connect to a rig that was off operation, but in reality he connected to a rig that was during drilling. And he wanted to update a system, but fortunately the emergency shutdown systems and safety systems prevented a major catastrophe in this event. And finally, there was also a ferry in the US a time ago that had a loss of primary propulsion control. The system was defect, but there was also the aspect of human interface. They were not trained in order to quickly respond to such a scenario. So in the end, and this emergency exercise seemed to not have been in place for this particular scenario, or not effectively trained. So the vessel grounded in the end. Moving back then to the report, we can see that fortunately there is a lot of people more and more increasing in awareness that actually cyber risks has the same potential consequence as any other safety and physical risk that we see in the maritime domain. This was very different when I started in 2014 with DNV working on these topics. And we have more than half of the senior management is also looking at cybersecurity as a high priority topic when they're managing their companies. I hope these numbers can increase over time as well, because I do believe that this is important for us to safeguard our future way ahead. A lot of other numbers are popping up here, but my point that I wanted to make sure that everyone got is that there is lack of certainty when we are talking about how well we are prepared, both when it comes to preventing an incident from happening on the OT side, even more on the OT side than it's on the IT side, less than half in both cases, and even less in OT side for preparation assurance. And then if we look at how well we are prepared in covering recovering and also responding to incidents on the vessel side is only 19%, and on the shore side it's 30%. And I think these numbers come back to the fact that we have lower numbers again on board the vessel due to a lot of OT systems on board that are not designed with cybersecurity in mind, at least not for the past fleet or the fleet in operation, as well as we are lacking training in many cases and exercises that we just saw in other examples that I just mentioned. Moving forward, we also have seen some tendency on the regulatory side, and Jarle is going to dig into this for us in a moment. But this survey was done in April and May, so it doesn't necessarily reflect the latest update of the IACS rules, but it still shows a tendency that I think is important to point out, and that we have just over 50% is thinking that the regulation that was in place, especially thinking back on our IMO management system requirements and so on, that it's effective enough. And I think there's a big gap there to close. And also only 36% is looking at cybersecurity compliance being something straightforward. And I think that goes back with a lack of maybe experience, pilot cases, and also the lack of the maturity in the OT domain on cybersecurity. So therefore, it's no surprise that almost 50% is looking for external support also to get effective compliance towards the ever-changing regulatory framework in this domain. Okay, just 2 more slides from my side, and then we will have a poll, but just mentioning also a couple of different challenges that we have seen from the people that responded in the survey. The number 1 challenge is to implement security on board vessels, is that it's lack of budget, lack of resources, lack of priority in that sense on cybersecurity. Also, and that goes alongside with the resources that we have training needs from crew members as well as the people on shore, how to handle, especially on the OT side, cyber incidents and operations. We lack many times maybe the exercises on handling incidents on board, and we don't necessarily have that remote support. Maybe an incident happens and then we actually we're dead in the water in the sense that we are not able to get experts supporting us. So that's another challenge. We also see that management systems, both in normal operation, might not be as effective as they are supposed to. It's easy to write something that sounds idealistic, but it's another thing to actually implement it. And that also belongs to the procurement of new systems into ships and operations, as well as the whole new building topic that Jarle is going to speak more about later. We typically also recommend that to implement someone that is champion cybersecurity on the OT domain. So we define something in many of our projects that we work on with clients called a fleet cybersecurity officer that really can champion this and spread the news and spread his knowledge around the company. And then obviously also the OIMs are a part of the challenge, and we need to work all the different stakeholders together in order to meet the challenge the best. So before wrapping up here from my end, I will just summarize some key recommendations from my side. We have, I didn't mention in the beginning, but we also discussed the topic of digitalization overall in this report. And digitalization is also something that we think is profiting the maritime industry, but it can only profit it if we are able to reap the positive sides of it, and therefore we actually need to also handle cyber threats. So in that sense, not just looking at cybersecurity as a pure cost by itself, but also looking at it as an investment in order to enable digitalization and in order to make ourselves more effective and more looking ahead and innovative in that sense. The second one that I already spoke about, but it's warm at heart for me, is the treating cybersecurity risk in the same manner that safety risks. So do not separate them, but treat them in the same risk matrix and execute similar activities and priorities also on the top management to handle the risk. Champion industry insight sharing, share incidents, share near misses, be part of a forum. I was just very happy about being in London last week at the IMO. We had 350 people talking about maritime cybersecurity in a big session. I'm happy to actually present this report back then as well. And other initiatives that are feeding our collaboration is, I think, key for us to handle ourselves better in the future. Look at regulations also to be a good foundation to stand on, but also strive towards continuous improvements, especially since we have a changing threat environment around us, and also our systems on board and our software, hardware is actually changing over time as well. Rethink supply chain vulnerabilities, talk to your vendors and also your yards in order to make sure that you have the right procurement in place, that you are doing your risk assessment before you implement systems on board. It's easier to take care of the risk beforehand than trying to patch afterwards. And finally, roll out effective training. It can be both a general awareness training with different types of tools, e-learning, face-to-face exercises, and so on, but also dedicated training to different certain responsibilities that your crew and your onshore staff have. With that, thank you for your attention, and I pass it over for Paul.
Hi, thanks, Svante. Yeah, as part of the webinar today, we'd actually like to get your feedback on where you're sitting in terms of your preparedness for the IACS Unified Requirements. And so we're asking, at what stage are you at with your with respect to your readiness for IACS UR? Are you already class approved? Your system or vessel is already class approved? Piloting cybersecurity measures? Currently in the preparation stages, planning on beginning work shortly, or you haven't yet started the work. If you could take a minute there to click and let us know where you are at, and we'll have a look at the results in about a minute. And if I can just also remind you maybe at this stage that at any time during the webinar, you can use that question mark button to type a message into chat, and we'll get that content-wise in the end of the session. So anytime that something is unclear, or you'd like some clarification or extra information on one of the topics that's being raised by the presenters, please use that question mark button. So let's have a look at our results here. So we've got a pretty almost even split now between those piloting cybersecurity measures and those preparing cybersecurity measures. Jarle, throwing it over to you, what do you make of that result? A little bit a more prepared bunch than we had in our first session this morning.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, and thank you for sharing here. It's a similar trend, but maybe also a bit more that are already piloting the number of cybersecurity measures, but it is that we experience. We have about 9% here already going through an approval, maybe the ones trying to pilot it, but the IACS UR is quite a new thing, and it's something that really needs to be looked into. And that's what we share here. A third, the biggest share, 30%, is now currently working to prepare, which is good. There is still some time for the other to get up and running on the topic as well. But with the one who have not started yet, who are just planning to start, I think you should really consider to get moving, because especially if you have a system owner, which takes time to develop a new system. So I think then the session here comes handy when it comes to actual timing of it. So let's move on, jump into the IACS Unified Requirement and the class role. And I'm really happy to see that the class societies take this responsibility, ensuring also cybersecurity and safety in the times of digital transformation. Maritime needs to take on digital tools to operate more efficiently, but also to operate more environmental friendly. So we cannot do that by not using the digital tools available to us, but we should do it in a safe way, like we do with the other topics we do in our industry. So what do you need to know about the cybersecurity IACS UR? So the first one, new vessels contracted after 1st of July 2024 will need to have cybersecurity approved. It will be mandatory. The UR comprises of two different sets of unified requirements, the E26, which looks at how yard and designer should design the vessels, and also how the owner needs to operate it. And then you have E27, which looks at how systems should be designed. Just for information, the original UR came out in April 2022. There has been work now, but mainly on checking how to verify it. So the actual requirement have changed very, very little. That's good, because if you started preparing already, it's still on the same road. The E27 got published in October with the minor updates how to check verification, and E26 will be published now by the end of the year. We expect it quite soon. It is ready already. It's going through the approval process within IACS. So that's the IACS UR, and then who gets affected by the IACS UR? So you can say it's basically the whole merchant global fleet. You have passenger ships, cargo ships, high-speed ships, mobile offshore drilling units. So basically what we know as the core merchant industry in our maritime will be affected by these unified requirements and have to approve cybersecurity. Some exceptions exist, like navies, which are their own flag, mega yachts, luxury yachts for private use. Of course, these doesn't have to do it. But in our context, we already see now that even these Navy vessels, mega luxury yachts, are actually applying cybersecurity due to privacy reasons and even cyber warfare reasons on a voluntary basis. So this is going to be a common standard for all vessels. When you look at what systems have to be covered, it is basically all essential important SOLAS equipment on board the vessel. What keeps the vessel moving, and what also is there to handle an emergency situation like fire detection. So propulsion, steering, watertight integrity, navigation, communication, and so forth. But please know there are some discussions on some systems which may not be safety critical. So for example, environmental equipment, which is not safety critical and not connected directly to the other control system in scope, may be taken out of scope, but these discussions are still ongoing, and we'll have more details when the E26 comes out later this year. So how has DNV picked this up? So for DNV, we have the Cybersecure Essential class notation, which is well aligned and complies with the IACS UR. We also have the luck of testing. So together with you, which some of you are the pioneers in the maritime industry, with the vessel systems going through approval with DNV. So more than 200 vessels and systems have already been contracted for approval, and more than 50-60 of them are already done. So we gained a lot of interest and experience, which have been great. We're also working together with key yards and suppliers around the world. And that's the benefit of having this piloting phase that we did the last few years. So many yards across big yard countries have done project with cybersecurity voluntary. Suppliers have started preparing for it. I think this is great for us to practice on something which is not trivial. And of course, us as a class society, we also are taking on a new topic, and we are in the process now of training our surveyors doing FAT, the factory acceptance test, our surveyors at the yards, our surveyors visiting your vessels, and also all our approval engineers. It's also a big change for us. If we look at a little how have been working with this the last few years, basically the rules that we had since 2018 is more or less identical to the IACS UR, because there was a good decision then to put it towards the IEC 62443. That's an excellent standard for control system cybersecurity, and basically what you should do when you do control system, no matter if it's a maritime unit or if it's a manufacturing plant, power grids, and so forth. So that has been I think a good decision by our initial rules, but also how IACS has been putting it forward. So the voluntary class notation we had a couple of years have helped us internally and externally to build competence. There is a major change now in the July 2023 rules. So initially we had project directly with the yard. All was handled with the yard, and the yard got information from the suppliers. Because honestly, it would be too much for us to align with all the supplier contracts and supplier work we have around the world. But that changed in July 2023. And now it's set up how the mandatory rules will be implemented so that each system will be approved during the FAT, or the factory acceptance test, and then only the integration then will be postponed to be done at the yard. We will also do a minor updates in Q1 2024, but that's basically changing a word from voluntary to mandatory, so that it will be mandatory for new buildings which are contracted from 1st of July 2024. We know different segment, different vessel, different owners have different demands and needs. And that's why we have multiple levels here. So the key level is the cybersecurity essential, aligned with the IACS UR. If you approve a system, you should go then for security profile 1. But we also recognize that some vessels may be existing with existing equipment. You don't have the opportunity to change that much. And that's where you can use the cybersecure qualifier. It's also security profile 1 of the onboard equipment. This is good management system, good network interfaces, but less requirement to system on board because you can do it on existing vessels. It's also a very good way to practice if you're new to the topic as a yard on a voluntary basis. We also have the cybersecure advanced level, but I think that's not something that you should seriously consider if you don't have very specific requirement, because in practice, you would actually need to develop specific control system only for your vessel. And that's quite costly and only applicable for really high-end vessels. So you would probably not be able to use Modbus TCP being a non-protected protocol and having to change the whole infrastructure on board. So how do you build cybersecurity? Compared to like what we do on machinery and hull, it's a bit different, because for steel you test it, you can even do destructive testing to what are the limits of it, and then you can trust that material. For cybersecurity, it changes day by day and even minute by minute. So a firewall that used to be secure yesterday, like the Cisco firewall we recently had in the news, suddenly has a vulnerability which makes it open and potential to hack the day after. And so that's why we need multiple barriers. And this defense in depth model, as we call it, is something we really recommend, and we need to cooperate to make that happen. So the first part is the owner. So physical and procedural security, basically keeping access who gets on board, making sure that people are trained, and that stops a lot of attacks on vessels. And even if somebody gets on board a vessel, they may reach, let's say, the crew entertainment system. You have the digital watertight sections on board a vessel, which makes sure that anything going from crew entertainment wouldn't get down to the control system or to the navigation systems on the bridge. This is typically a yard task. And even if you reach a critical ECTIS or a critical an IIS or a main engine control system, that system should also be at least as secure as our computers here. So that's the manufacturer task of securing the systems. If you look at the regulatory side, IMO had the ISM cybersecurity risk resolution since 2021, mainly looking at the physical and the procedural part. The IACS UR goes across in a defense in-depth approach. This is also what we see that we have in our class rules, the class notation, as well as the type approval with manufacturers. So how do we translate this defense in-depth model looking at the IACS UR? So if you start with the first circle against ship owners, is in the E26. How shall ship owners operate vessels to keep them secure? So that's the first layer. Security zones, the digital watertight sections, the network segmentation, the remote access, that is also given in E26 and is the second layer. And finally, E27 gives the requirement towards onboard equipment. So you can also see this model here, for example, unauthorized access have multiple levels of defense: access, physical access, security zones, identification, authentication, logins, strength of passwords. So all those contributes to ensuring that in a changing world, our vessels still stay secure. If you move on to the next, so how is DNV trying to fulfill this defense in-depth approach? So we do what we've done on other topics. We start with looking at the yard. So how can we support the yard in verifying that the actual design of the vessel is good? So that's our new building design approval. Then we come to the yard to witness the testing, to see the integration testing. So the vessel actually has a proper integration on a higher level. We have the system certification where all the essential important system as part of scope is being approved for that one vessel project and that one vessel installation. You have the option here of doing a type approval where you can reuse much of the approval, but I'll come more back to that later. And of course, even if the vessel was delivered secure, it's still important that it's kept secure. The way we're doing that is to follow up with the owner. How is procedures, training, competence, management of change being done to stay that to keep the vessel secure? That's something that we do together with you as ship owners. And of course, after 5 years, we look a bit more back on the technical measures again. So you may say, what does this mean for us? What do we need to prepare? So there's certain design documentation that you need to prepare and certain tests you need to execute. When you look at the yard documentation, it's typically the asset inventory, the network topology, as well as the cybersecurity design documents. Suppliers, on the other hand, needs also to document their devices, their security capabilities, the topology of that system, but also the secure development processes and how they handle software development. And of course, a system is only as secure as it's been configured. This is an important element as well. And not only having it written, it's also important that it's actually implemented. And that's what we see here with the 2 additional exercises, witnessing the test procedure at the factory acceptance test, and also witnessing and approving the test procedure that's being done at the yard as an integration exercise. And coming into operation is about reviewing the cybersecurity management system and also checking the competence of the crew. So delving a little bit more into the details here. So what shall yards and designers do? When it comes to the IACS role for us, we do approval of the design through our approval centers, and also we will do site service or test witnessing at the individual yards. So the key documents that you will need to prepare is the one highlighted here in light blue. So an inventory list, network topology, cybersecurity design philosophy, and the test procedure where you describe how are you going to show the defenses described in the design document. The asset inventory, the first element here, is a key document, because if you don't know what you have on board your vessels, it's very difficult to manage the risk of it and also to manage change of it. So I think this is a huge benefit, even beyond cybersecurity, that we will have better documentation of what we have on board our vessels: software versions, hardware versions, interfaces, integration, remote access. But each of the suppliers would here need to deliver an asset inventory for their equipment, and also the yard put them together, and the owner will need to keep it sharp over the lifetime of the vessel. Please also note that even though we listed a lot of systems earlier, some systems, let's say analog electrical systems, is very limited prone to cybersecurity risks. There is an option here in the IACS UR E26. How can system be defined to be so low risk that it doesn't have to fulfill the requirements? And this exercise should be done by the yard, supported by the suppliers. So if there's an isolated system, no network connections, it's located in a physical restricted area, there's no way of getting in a USB drive, physical access to do software updates. And also, it's not an integrated system fulfilling more purposes than only one. In addition, you need to look at how critical is it. But if all those makes a low risk, you're actually able to argue why that system should not be prone to approval and verification. Another document that the yard needs to deliver is the overall network topology. So you can say this is actually the digital GA plan. So what we focus here on is this watertight zones you will see maybe if you look at it in a digital and normal ship session. So control system should be a separate zone. Secure safety system should of course be separated from what happens in the control system. So bridge zones as well, and then also separated from the remote access and the IT, crew entertainment, and office. So these should be separated. And of course also we're very interested in how do they talk together, and even more important, how may you connect to shore? Because if somebody can attack the vessel from the outside, this is definitely something that we need to look at. The cybersecurity design description document is probably the most comprehensive document that you need to make as the yard. We have some templates and samples available for you to work on, but it should describe what is given in the topology. It needs to describe the remote access connections, how that's taken into account, the risk assessment if you take out some systems, and of course any cybersecurity actions which goes across vessel functions. So let's say you have a manual procedure of scanning USB drives, of course that should be then also described there because it's used across multiple systems. When it comes to the supplier, we are two roads to get to compliance here. The first one is, I don't have a type approval. I approve my specific equipment for this installation. This means that you will provide documentation for it. It will send to the DNV Approval Center. When that's ready, the local DNV office would send people to watch the survey there at the factory acceptance test. Yes, this equipment is actually aligned and programmed and configured according to the requirement of the IACS UR. You may also approve your product upfront with a type approval. That means that we have looked into the system and said, yes, this system can be secure. It has the capabilities to do it. And that's been a thorough product verification, which means that then for every vessel delivery, you would need less documentation. You would then typically say, I show that this system I'm delivering is aligned with the type approved system. So asset inventory, topology, how do you configure it? And also an internal test to show that, hey, I'm actually delivering something which is set up according to the proper requirement. And then the FAT part, the cybersecurity part of the FAT may be omitted. The documents you need to focus on producing are given here. So it's the one with a bit darker blue color here. So it's the inventory list, the asset inventory. It is the description of how your system ensures that the requirements are fulfilled. It is the topology of your system, including interfaces to other systems and even remotes. It's about your secure development process. How do you make sure that patches, things you do over time, is also keeping the system? And of course, the recommended configuration to ensure that your system for this delivery is actually correct. The test procedure shows that the capabilities described are actually fulfilled. So this is the typical documentation need for a supplier. This list may sound a bit or seem a bit frightening in the beginning because it's quite long. But again, it's not rocket science. It's something that you just need to build into your systems. And the IAC standard splits that into very relevant sections here. So identification, authentication, how do you log in, use control, what can you do, system integrity, how can you trust the data, restricted access. So if you have a system that not only keeps in its zones, but goes across different zones or even to shore, you also need to look at a few requirements for E26. That's an important factor to note. Confidentiality, making sure that passwords are encrypted, not plain text. Making sure that logs also looks at cybersecurity, not only looking at maybe starting and stopping. Resource availability, what happens if there's a network storm? What happens if there's an incident? You need to do backup, recover it. That's part of the FR or the 7. Also here, there's a few interfaces when you connect to untrusted network, to the IT zone on board or to the shore. These are given in the IACS UR E27, chapter 4.2. So these are important if you have an external access. And finally, it's not only about the system capabilities, but your capabilities as an organization, and that's being checked in the secure development lifecycle. So that's an audit or a survey being done on how you develop systems. We said earlier also, you can do a type approval. If you do a type approval, what happens? Basically, the ship-specific documentation will be greatly reduced because we know that your system can be secure. You would then show the type approval certificate and show how that fits with your delivery. And then the FAT survey will be omitted because you will send a copy of your internal test report, and we know how you do internal testing. This type approval is a bit more comprehensive. We really want to do one really thorough review of your system, and it goes through different steps. So the first step, which starts here, is that you show me basically what systems you have, what hardware, what software. Also, when you do a type approval, you repeatedly produce your product, so we need to show that you have a quality management in place. And of course, anything being put on board a vessel should take environmental aspects such as vibration, humidity, EMC, and so forth. If you have a type approved system, those typically are even fulfilled in your current approvals. Then you go into showing the design. So description of security capabilities, configuration, backup recovery procedures, topology drawings, all the documents that we need to have a reliable proof that your system fulfills it when it comes to design. And then it goes to testing. So a test procedure showing how your system can be verified, and then you execute the test and we witness. So we know that your system is designed to be secure and it can actually be shown in practice. Also, we don't want to see your system every day you put a cybersecurity patch towards it. That's what we do here. So we check your procedure for change management so that you can manage, keep your system secure, and contact DNV if you have major changes that are being impacted, and then we will do a retesting of it. But other day-to-day practices, so bug fixes, change handling, security patches is something that you take care of because you're good at it. When you come to the ship owner has been lucky enough to get a vessel which is deemed to be cyber secure, both from the yard and the suppliers. It's important to keep that level up. So how we do that in the class aspect is that we ask for a management system. So your procedures to say what your responsibilities, physical access restriction, training, incident response, of those aspects. And we do that by a thorough survey or even audit, which is done at the first year. So seeing how people are competent. It's not done directly after deliverable because typically it takes a bit of time before the crew is operating the vessel as intended. But that happens then within the first year. And after that, DNV has very competent surveyors coming on board, which just witnessed that the vessel is still being operated. So they ask questions on cybersecurity in addition to the other safety relevant questions and comments and things they observe. And after 5 years, as normal class, normal aspect of ship maintenance, we do the renewal when we go look back against the technical requirements again. So I will not delve a lot into this one because cybersecurity management procedure is something that you know well. You have an ISM, you have the ISM cyber risk resolutions since 2021. But typically best practices of a management system, not only on paper, but also being lived on board. So we've been talking a lot now. Let's try to sum up, make a few slides that you can take up if you don't want to watch or if you can't remember the whole presentation. First, as a supplier, first question is my system within scope? If it's within scope, you have to design security capabilities according to E27. You also need to improve your secure development process. You could do a type approval because it may be more efficiently for you. But anyway, every time you deliver a vessel or a system towards a vessel, you need to configure it, harden it, and make sure that you have a product certificate for this delivery towards this vessel. Even if you're not part of systems scope here, there are commercial pressure on you. So we also see that other non-mandatory equipment are even getting also type approved because owners have that concern, and charters and insurance companies as well. If you move on to the next one, yards, sorry. The yard should first start with looking at the list of equipment, see what is negligible risk, make sure that the system which are left having a risk fulfill E27, put them together and design the zones as required, ensure that it's implemented on board the vessel, make sure there is a test procedure in place and submit those documents for approval, and then also execute integration tests on board the vessel. Luckily, that scope will be less because we already test the systems at factory acceptance test. Documentation from the owner is more about the procedure management system needs to be well established, implemented, and demonstrated through the survey. So this is the action list, but let us also try just on a high level, if you are to tell somebody else in your company what to do with the IACS UR, I think this one is a slide I would share. So first one, IACS Unified Requirement is mandatory for new vessels with contract date from 1st of July 2024. DNV Cybersecure Essential is the reply to become compliant. We have a good practice. We've been doing those projects, more than 200 vessels and system contracted. So we believe we are a good partner for you in this important aspect. As an owner, you need to make sure that you put this into your spec if you have a contract after 1st of July next year. You could also consider applying it earlier because you may want to stay commercially attractive. Maybe oil majors, maybe cargo owners put this requirement towards, and you don't want to build a vessel a few months earlier and it's becoming outdated because it doesn't have that level of defenses. And the lower level cybersecurity is also something you could consider to apply to existing vessels. Yards, look at your design, implement the barriers, build the competence, also talk to your suppliers. And the suppliers, you have the biggest task here, develop further your systems and consider also type approval. So this was a little bit about the IACS UR. Maybe Svante could complement the presentation a little bit of how we could support beyond the IACS UR and class role.
Yes, thank you, Jarle, and thank you for sharing all those slides. Let's sum up. Let's see if I can get into the next slide as well. It should be, here we go, I think, yeah. So I'm not going to bore you with too much of the commercialization here, but I want to make sure that you at least have heard it and you have seen our faces. I'm responsible for, as Simon said in the beginning, our advisory team. So we have in the greater now DNV combined forces on cybersecurity. We have a 500-man strong advisory segment, which do both consultancy as well as 24/7 managed support services to our customers. We have a holistic point of view, both for ships in operation as well as new builds. And we have a lot of experience already from the past in implementing the cybersecurity class rules, as well as other topics, everything from training to exercises and so on. So if you're interested, please reach out to us and we are happy to help you, also in the sense of both preparing for the class, but also to test and make sure that everything is in compliance. Just a final slide before we go into the Q&A session. We have on the left-hand side, you see our Maritime landing page, where we are just bunching up together all the information that can be relevant to you. There is also the contact information, how to reach out to us if you have a request. In the middle, you can see a few different links that will also be shared this presentation for you later on, and where you can also download the priority report that I summarized. And then, as I said before, just reach out to us in advisory through the contact information here. And then I think, Jarle, you can add on the type approval and class notation.
Yes, I think you have contact persons in DNV class. Use those. They know who we are, and we will align and keep a good interface and continue discussion on safety with you. Type approvals can be requested by your local office. Class notation is just a string you add to your vessels, and we'll take care of the rest. Moving to the Q&A, maybe?
Exactly. Thanks so much, both of you there. We've had quite a few interesting questions, so let's get on to some of those. One of the ones that we have gotten several times is around the which vessels are going to be affected, both in terms of the date and the vessel type. And I think as we have several attendees from the US here, and especially in the cruise and yacht industry, we've had several questions about the applicability of the rules to super yachts. So if we could maybe pick that up, which vessels again are affected, and in particular if we could discuss super yachts in terms perhaps of mandatory, but also what might be done in terms of voluntary notations.
Yes, you can probably say what it's according to the SOLAS code, right? More than 12 passengers. Then it's also you have to take mega yachts into account when they are commercial use. Cargo vessels from 500 gross ton, passenger vessels from 500 gross tons, mobile offshore drilling units, the MODU code is there. But I think you would go back to the slide we showed earlier. They really have the details, which are in and which are out. But in practice, all vessels needs to consider cybersecurity. The one that are on the top here under the list that we showed earlier is the one to have to do it, but the other one should do it as well. You don't want cybersecurity incidents happening. It's something that affects all our work life, private life, vessel operation. Just think about it and do it. That would be our response.
So we had quite a couple of questions about cross-acceptance of cybersecurity certificates. So if this is going to be possible from between different classes.
So there's no mutual recognition on the class rules. This is an IACS Unified Requirement which each class will implement in their rules. Luckily, it's linked to an IEC standard, which makes it the same for all classes. That's good. Very, very similar. But each class will require a separate type approval. We know some companies are trying to merge it, so they do it testing together. But of course, if you've done it once, it's going to be a very simple exercise when you repeat it. But there's no mutual recognition for these IACS URs.
Thanks for that. Let's keep going and have a look at a question here around. We talked a lot about the requirements, but there's also a lot of questions around sort of how can we manage to get the training and support involved, and also about the kind of initiatives that DNV is involved in to help the maritime sector become more cyber risk aware.
Yeah, maybe, that is definitely something we are champion in DNV. We like to share our insights, such as the cybersecurity priority report here, but also we have launched a couple of years ago together with GARD. We did an awareness video that is still available and still used by many stakeholders out there. 20 minutes, one version, and a short version, 3 minutes, really to just show what can happen on board a vessel today, and it's used by many crew members. We have everything, also collaboration with Seagull in terms of rolling out e-learning training to crew members, and I think as you saw in the examples I gave before, I think the exercises in sense of emergency response will continue being more and more in the focus of our customers also moving forward. So that is another important aspect that we support.
So thanks, Svante. Let's have a look at some of the things around more specific things. As a supplier, where does the responsibility regarding patch policy take place after delivery?
That's a very interesting question. What you see here is that how to keep the vessel low. So typically for a main engine, you may have a maintenance process, right? So you will do the changes of it. So you could say patching is done by the owner. The owner has a maintenance agreement. So that needs to be done. So it's part of what we check with the owner, not necessarily checked in the supplier follow-up.
Thanks for that. Let's look down on our list of questions. We've probably got time for a couple more. Here's one. Can cybersecurity be integrated into the ISM safety manual, or is it separate? If integrated, can it be co-certified, the ISM be co-certified by the ISM certifying class?
So it's of course, it's up to you. How do you make sure to implement it best? You can make your own cybersecurity management system. You can implement it as part of the ISM management system. You can maybe have a good IT cybersecurity management system. So it's very flexible how you do it. You should do it so that it's easy for your crew to apply it. How it's being verified, this is an annual exercise done by class. So it's an independent exercise combined to what you would do as an ISM exercise, which is on behalf of flags, done every 2.5 years on the vessels and every year in the office. So it's an independent exercise. Class and ISM may be different for a vessel, but of course, if you have that with both with the same class, there should be synergies here.
Maybe add also on the effectiveness. Our experience is that we have seen that using the same kind of format and as well as the structure as you have been using before in your safety management system actually is a good way of doing it, because that emphasize the business as usual. We are just taking cyber risks as any other risks on board the vessel. We know where to treat it and who has typical responsibilities, and you find in the documents much easier, and it's structured in the same way that you are used to. So that is a good way of doing it. It's not, in that sense, you don't have to necessarily make a complete separate framework to deal with the cybersecurity risks, but try to implement it and integrate it as far as possible. That's my recommendation.
Thanks. We've had a couple of questions around the cybersecurity, DNV cybersecurity notations. Perhaps we can have a look at what the notation and the plus notation covers, and a little bit around, have we done some advanced cybersecurity notations? How many of these would be sort of voluntary? I guess they're all voluntary at this stage, but would cover the unified requirements as they are now, or would be beyond that?
So I think this advanced cybersecurity level is really difficult to reach. I would be very careful by applying that to the control systems on board. However, where you may want to apply it, when you come to the central IT gateway to connect to shore, this is IT equipment, and they will typically be able to fulfill such requirements. And you can add that using the plus notation. So IT equipment, I don't know, the payment solution, the casino on board a cruise ship, the drilling system of a drilling rig, the bow loading system of a shuttle tanker, all those can be added to scope on a voluntary basis, because that may be your crown jewels of your operation and you really want to protect those.